PTI zinc?
That's a good question. Well, one of the things that we do when producers are using any product, whatever it might be, if it is the zinc, we've come back where we've just said we could share this alongside. Like on the starter fertilizers, for example, the Nano CS, I'll go on that one too. When we know that farmers are putting down in row a 1034 or a 624-6, whatever it is, we like to let them know when we see the salty levels of the soils, when we're talking about the calcine, but when we see the higher levels of the salts, we want to let them know what the 1034 has in it. We're not picking on it, but we're letting them know how high levels of salt is in that 1034 going back into the soil. And so what we're doing with the Nano CS, then for example, if they're putting 5 gallons down per acre on their corn, we're getting them to cut back to 2 gallons per acre maximum, and then going with the 6 ounces of the Nano CS.
So what about, but your micronutrients, like a nano zinc versus a 12% zinc? But the question we get all the time is, can I cut back on my zinc?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I always go with the first route I go is just to account for the cost.
Correct.
Have you gotten to a point where you feel like you can go a volume cut back, not just a cost cut back?
Either way, yep. Yes. And it's interesting, and I'll go back to the calcine to answer that question too. When farmers see, and I'll go back to if it's a gallon per acre, for example, it's approximately $50 per gallon. So if they're putting down 10 gallons or 10 acres of gluten when we get started, we want to see their toughest ground that they're putting that down on first of all. The maximum that they would be spending is right around that $50 per gallon per acre. In the second year, we'll tell them it'll be cut back by 50% in the second season, or even less than that. And in that 3 to 5 year reclamation process, when farmers see the ground coming back again, we've even had producers come back and say, I'm not going to buy another quarter section. This ground is coming back to life again, and I don't need to go buy anymore because we either own that ground and we're paying taxes on it, or we're renting that ground, and the producers that own it are participating in even coming on board because of drain tile up there. We know a lot of producers that put drain tile in for the people who are coming out to rent the ground too, and they're participating in this too. So when you use the word cost, we turn to them and say, this isn't a cost, it's an investment. And the return on this investment is for you.
Right. So this work on heavy clays and
Yes.
gumbo type ground
Yeah.
that cracks open in the summertime that you about fall in?
Yeah, it does. We've had the privilege of going into some of the toughest grounds where we'll talk to them about this is an opportunity, but we want to cut it back on acreage. Because some guys have said to us through listening to, I'll just use a funny name, Joe Bolo told us this, and we should put it on our whole farm. And we come back and say, you don't want to do that. We want you to see this first. And don't get me wrong, but we always will use the terminology, this isn't on campus. This is your soil. And you know this soil, if you're the 3rd generation or the 1st generation or the 4th, whatever the number is, to see this coming back to life again is where we want to participate. And that's why when we go out every 12 months, when we get started, we'll pull that soil sample. We are not charging for that sample, and we're not just looking for the NPK, we're looking for all the micronutrients that are there. And then we'll continue to do that every 12 months, so that if they see something coming up in that ground, and maybe the corn came up this high, and over here where they didn't have so many issues on the soils, it's above your head, but they'll say things like, we've never seen this happen before. In the sugar beet world, that's been a lot of fun for us too. We're up in a big company up in our area in the Red River Valley called American Crystal Sugar. And they have been not just getting excited about, they're not out promoting the calcine, but they're telling other farmers to go ahead and do some trial work with it too. And in other words, they're not selling calcine. But to have that privilege, American Crystal Sugar, and that's a third party, then you can look at it that way, where we're seeing sugars coming up high in that ground because of what's going on to the salt. The salt is going down and it's taking place. And then I can talk about Nano K for a little bit on what American Crystal Sugar is also excited about. Farmers are going out and they're doing 3 spray applications on a foliar applications with the Nano K. They've been doing that now for the last several years. And what they're seeing now, instead of 32 or 3,000, whatever the tonnage is, 32,000 ton, whatever
32
it
tons.
is, they're up in the 40s.
Yeah.
And they're increasing it by at least 10 more ton or more, which has been exciting to sit back and watch. And the sugar levels is where American Crystal's Sugar is kind of smiling and teasing me by saying, they don't have to raise 1,000 acres anymore, they can put down 200 acres and that's it, because we got a lot of sugar over here, so that's been kind of fun as well. But that's what's been going on the soil health, and then when we go to number 2, the plant health. And so anyway,
Thank you.
and I'll close it with this. I've said it too many times. We look at 3 levels: the past, the present, and the future. And with what's happening in the future is farmers are putting their whole acreage, and it doesn't matter how big of a farmer they are. If they started out with 10 acres or 5 acres, they're putting this on all their crops. And they're not just cutting back, because even on the good soils, it's compared to with what drain tile was talked about when drain tile came back up in our valley back in 2000, it was 2005, 2006. Being taught that it even works good on good ground. And when we talk about that, it isn't just designed for bad ground, it's working on good ground as well. So.
Are you saying if you're gonna ask a grower to spend $50, correct, the first year? Right,
Yes.
okay. Is he going to reduce or eliminate any of his commercial fertilizer program?
Eventually it does. And that's why when we call it the 3 to 5 year reclamation process, then we see the nutrient levels in that soil come back to life again. And I could go back to, don't get me wrong, I'm farming, growing up farming too. I remember when we had healthy soils, back in the days when Dad would put us out and doing all the work in the fields. Because I think we were 9 when we got to drag tractors. Anyway, and what would happen is we were using, don't take this wrong, we weren't using anhydrous ammonia yet. So when we were out doing our field work, we would see birds flying all over the place, and you could smell the soils. And we would go, oh my gosh, and we'll talk about that every now and then. And then all of a sudden we would go back and we would see earthworms, because that's what the birds were doing out there.
You don't see
When I heard, and when we talked about that, and going right back to with what we learned what happened down in Arizona, one of the farmers, the very first farmer that decided that he was gonna participate with Calcine, he got a phone call from, you know who works for farmers down in that area down in Arizona. And if they can't speak English, that's fine, because about 6 of them left the place because they got so scared, so nervous, because they'd never seen earthworms before. And Calcine brought the earthworms up out of their soils. And we just went back like this and thought, uh-oh. So when we went back and pulled the soil samples, we started to see with what you just talked about, the natural levels of nutrients coming back in. And we had to sit down and explain to them that it's pretty healthy when you talk about biological aspects. Earthworms were doing a good job. Yep. Well, thank you.